Kia ora, welcome back to another Stag Raw podcast. This episode I'm joined by Hayden Pritchard. He claims to be a washed-up strength athlete, but I think he's still got a bit of power left in him. What was he doing the other day? 120 bench press, hearty. Check out his podcast, the Stronger Dads podcast. Of course, easy peasy, there's links in the show notes. Bit of a disclaimer. Hayden and I posed a bit of a critique on Huberman. Yes, controversial, I know. Now, we are both fans of Andrew Huberman communicating science, which is what we have a bit of a chat about here. Hayden, of course, is a PhD in sport and exercise science, so it's not just all bro science out there. Hayden's had a good gaze deep into some of this stuff, so yeah, you'll get a little bit more out of the Stronger Dads podcast than the name suggests. Hayden is very educated as well as being a high-level strength athlete himself. Make sure you check it out. Check out his page and follow along with what Hayden has done so far and the things to come. It's pretty exciting stuff. It was an awesome chat we have here, as is seen by the amount of time that we gas-bagged for. Anyway, of course, the podcast is brought to you by Cane's Deer Velvet. If you or a loved one have some aches and pains setting in or an injury that needs support to heal, consider topping up the body with Cane's Deer Velvet. It's packed full of amazing nutrients that the body uses in maintaining the immune system, bones, joints, circulation, and general well-being. Find out more at www.canesdeervelvet.com and use the code STAGRAW252 for a 20% introductory discount. People, I've got some sad news. But wait, there's hope and there's time. Drink LMNT, unfortunately, have faced the facts that international logistics are a nightmare. As someone that was on the early days of Prove It, trying to get that into Australasia with the crew, it's not easy, I tell you that. So, if you'd like to get your hands on the free sample, which you click on drinkelement.com/stagraw and just pay for that shipping, or you want to get an order and remember spending $100 US gets you free shipping, and you might want to do that because come June 21, we will no longer have international shipping for Drink Element. I know. It's very sad. You Americans, you've got it all. And Canadians, it's not bad. Not a bad neighbour to have when you get stuff like Drink Element shipped across your borders. Hearty stuff. So yeah, check out that link. Get in your order before June 21. Get yourself a sample. And yeah, fantastic stuff. And if you're out there with a logistics background and getting the stuff into the country, holla, because man, it's good. Of course, drink Arepa, the world's smartest brain food, 100% natural, caffeine-free, affects you can feel. The code STAGRAW will get you 20% off. And if it's good enough for Stephen Adams, it's good enough for you. Of course, you've seen it plenty of times here on the Stag Raw. I think I'm sipping away on one while I talked with Hayden last week with Dave Wood. We had it there. Delicious stuff. If you're into Ribena, you'll love it. Of course, there's the sparkling and light out there as well. But yes, if you're doing an order off their website, Stag Raw will get you 20% off. Otherwise, pick it up in your service station or supermarket. All right, let's get into this episode. I think we're about 289. I think it's time we stop counting. Enjoy. Oh, wicked, they put a new button. Oh, no, they haven't.
How does this one work? Like how does your Google Meet, does it record pretty reliably? Or do you use some other software?
No, it's end-to-end, I'm pretty sure, as far as I'm aware.
But, so it's taking my input and your input separately or pretty much and then putting it together?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I haven't tried it because I've used Spotify for all of my ones so far. But it almost makes more sense then because my Calendly, I can choose to use like the Google Meet or, whatever the other Zoom, whatever it is, options. Yeah. But there's no Spotify. What's it called? Sorry.
Anchor podcast for.
No, what's the S? Skype.
Skype.
It's the one I use. I can't remember the name of the thing.
Yeah, Skype.
So I tend to use the Skype. So yeah,
Spotify's just your day to day. So
Yeah, Spotify is where the podcasts end up, isn't it?
Yeah. Hayden Pritchard, I love it when you come onto a podcast and you've got this intro in your head and we think you're going to lead conversation, and then you do a bit quick Google, and then you turn up in a bloody Turbos vest and you've completely thrown me, because we're going to dive straight into the Turbos, keep them in the first division, you reckoned?
Oh, did you find me back in the
day?
Days? Oh, geez. So that was a interesting time. That was when they were looking at turning the NPC competition, or they were going back, because when they had the 3 divisions and then it went down to the NPC and the Heartland or whatever. I think it's still called the NPC. Because we were second div when I first started, getting into rugby. So the reason I'm a Turbos fan, just to kind of give a little bit of history there, is that essentially I was born in Wanganui, but we lived in Martin at the time. So you can say, Wanganui, geez, but actually Martin's probably even, below Wanganui on the spectrum of towns of New Zealand.
Yeah.
But we lived there for a few years, and then Dad took up dairy farming, and we ended up living around the Manawatu, and then went up to the Waikato, and we were up there for a number of years before we came back to Palmy. So when I was up there, there was no Manawatu in the top division at that time anyway. And so for me, I was a Chiefs fan because I got into rugby when I was up there. We moved up there when I was about 7.
Mm-hmm.
That and my brother.
Who did you play for in Hamilton?
Who did I play for?
Yeah.
Hinuera was the club that we were playing for at the end. So we were, because we didn't live in Hamilton, we were in near Matamata.
Yeah.
So between there and, I don't know, I can't remember what it is, but it's the Matamata Piako district was the sort of area we are.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. Like Sasha's parents live in Tauranga now, and so I always drive through past those club rooms, and every time I go past now, Sash just has to give me grief, because I think probably the first 3 times we went past when her parents shifted up there, I was like, I used to play rugby there, and so every time we go through, she's like, oh, you used to play rugby there.
I think as Hotapu, we won a tournament there in 7s. Yeah, I can't remember whether that was the season I was injured, the season I was coaching, or the season I was playing. But yeah, actually, I think I might have had to miss the tournament because I was bloody working on the Saturday morning, and the lads won. I think that might have been the story. Yeah, rough Saturday working. Tell you what, it's no good for rugby.
So yeah, that was my rugby background. Then we moved back to Manawatu, and Dad was dairy farming down near where we started out. We're one of the first farms he ever worked on. He came back and was the manager there.
Yeah.
And so at that time there was no Turbos in the top division, and they moved back into that division as they did the revamp of the comp. And
they probably took over from Southland. That's probably when we had Battle Hawks
Bay. Yeah, because there was the relegation. Used to be that promotion relegation match every year. And I think there was a period there where it was Wanganui that won it every year, won the second division or whatever every year, and then would lose to Southland or someone.
The Butcher Boys.
Pretty much every season in that promotion relegation game. But yeah, that was a while back. And so when they were looking at restructuring that comp, that was back when Facebook was the thing. It wasn't Instagram. I don't even think Instagram existed. And so I wasn't very keen on us dropping out of the top division because I quite liked us being, competing against the big boys. And so I just randomly one day at work, we were a bit quiet. It was in retail. And I thought, man, I'm gonna start a page for this because I think this is rubbish. And then started this page and just did the old thing where you could send it on a message or whatever back in the day to every one of your friends that you had on Facebook. And then they people would like it because I was, went to Palmy Boys for my entire high school years. So you had a whole bunch of friends that were, rugby lads that liked Manawatu and enjoyed watching the Bucketheads. So yeah, it kind of just took off, and we got, I probably got more followers on that than I ever did on an athlete page for my powerlifting to save the Turbos. And I sold T-shirts and gave the fundraising to the rugby union, and also took a little bit for myself, I think, on some of those because I was a student, got to make some money. So yeah, that was a fun time, and I've been a loyal Turbos fan ever since we've been sort of back in that top division. Still a Chiefs fan, and Waikato are my second team. in terms of that. So if they're playing anyone else, I'll support them. But yeah, it was a good rivalry growing up, actually, with my brother supporting the Canes. So it was always fun going down to the Cake Tin on the train and wearing my Chiefs shirt when we'd move back and, getting all this grief. And then on the odd occasion that we'd win, because that was before the 2 championships under Dave Rennie. You'd take it really happily. And when you lost, you'd happily take the grief on the way home as well. It's good times, actually, if I think back to those years of watching footy down at the Cake Tin.
Absolutely. You're talking about Facebook there. That's part of the reason why I've got the nickname Stag and why this whole bloody show is called the Stag Roar. Is when Southland won in 2009, won the Ranfurly Shield. We all
don't talk about winning the Ranfurly Shield, mate. That's been our dream for years.
We did it twice in 2 years, mate. It was a bloody purple patch for sure, and then we went broke. So what was that? We all know how that happened. So anyway, when we got back, well, I think it might have even been it must have been when we all got back to Dunedin. Some people carried on down to Vicau and carried on the party, but it was the middle of exams. But we all changed our Facebook names to being first name Stag, whatever. And then I moved to Auckland the next year and playing at varsity, and all of a sudden I'm Stag.
And it was just because that was still your Facebook name.
Yeah, just my Facebook name. Do you remember your first bucket, mate?
Oh, I don't actually think I've hardly ever worn an actual bucket on the head. we were like the hard out fans, because when you go to a game like that and there's people like the bucket heads, they're the ones that are sitting at the back of the stand being ruckus, yelling abusive comments at the people and not actually paying attention to the game. And I'm probably someone who cares a little bit too much about the game and wants to watch the game, so we'd sit like in the stands, because being students and that, right, you want to get your best deal. And so you're sitting in the grandstands, and we'd just sit sort of a couple rows over from the buckethead, so that we were still in a good position, but we weren't, it was clear we weren't part of the bucketheads, just because you couldn't really pay attention to the game. And our lads are all, the lads that I go to the game with, they're all pretty keen on actually paying attention to the footy rather than yelling abuse at whoever's playing on the wing.
So when you were organising this Facebook page, are you sort of an identity when it comes to turning up to what's Manawatu Stadium called?
Well, geez, what have it been called back then? I think it's the nickname we have is the Boneyard, because there was one season where we didn't lose at home pretty much the entire year. I can't remember what year it was. We won the championship. I can't remember the year. It might have been 2014, 2015, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And that year we had a really good team that year, and then it became known as the Boneyard, and it stuck. But I wouldn't claim it as the Boneyard these days, unless it's our own team's bones, because we tend to win about as many games as Southland in a year, to be honest. Yeah,
that's where the Roaring Pen is a good name, because it's just a whole lot of noise. It doesn't necessarily have to lead to any results.
Yeah, well, I don't even think the bucketheads are really much of a thing anymore. Like the last Turbos game I went to, I don't even think there was a proper buckethead contingent anymore. And I don't know if that's just because the varsity students weren't on campus as much the last couple of years, because they're generally the ones that lead it, and then the rest of us are there to watch the game.
I flattered with, in my second year in Auckland, back in Auckland, flattered with a guy that was Manawatu Palmy Boys, and he was always giving me this one, the old twirly whirly. Yeah. I think the Manawatu Turbos need to do a bit of a drive back on you. Big T's as well. Oh gosh, yeah. We just had the antlers up. I've got a hard hat with antlers on it. It's featured in a few of the podcasts back in the day.
I thought I'd better put on the Turbo shirt today, so it's quite ironic that you brought that up straight away. I was looking through and I'm like, man, I probably actually have to wear something, because he's probably going to video this, so I probably need to wear something that has a bit of relevance.
Mate, I've had Keegan Smith on here, and especially when I was in Australia and it was stinking hot. Like at times it'd be, and we had 2 stories, and I'd be up on the top story, and it'd be like 30 degrees at 9:30 at night. So there's plenty of episodes with no top on. So yeah,
I wasn't going to do that for you, mate.
Precedent set there. So if you did start to indulge us with the get off.
Maybe it was post volume day on my bench press, and 5K run followed by a few sets of 15 on the bench, and finish with some curls. Maybe then if there's a bit of artificial exaggeration of the physique going on.
Yeah. So obviously the podcast is about strong dads. How is the dad life, the dad bod going on? Because you were competing real lean at 83 and then into the 93s. Like, what do you tip the scales at these days?
I'm actually sitting like way down at 81
Right.
these days, so I'm pretty light. So, I mean, we can rewind back and chat about powerlifting for a bit if you want, and
yeah,
some of
absolutely.
that stuff.
We'll get into that. Yeah.
So I mean, you mentioned that I got up to 93s, and so I basically when I was growing up, I played a bit of everything. Played rugby throughout most of my high school years. I stopped that in the 7th form year because I was trying to do well at the athletics nationals.
What event were you in?
So I was 400 meter was my main event.
Okay.
I was never like fantastic
How old are you?
at it.
Were you competing against Daniel O'Shea?
Don't think so.
He's
no.
South Under. Yeah, my good flatmate.
The one that I know, or the one that I remember from being the big dog back in the day was Andrew Underwood. I have no idea what he does now. I know that he was Wellington College back in the day, but he was the one that you'd see and you just know he was going to blitz you. But there was, I can't remember who the other one was, because in that, I think it was that year, the final of the 400, there were two guys, and I'm pretty sure it was him and one other. And I was coming, I was fighting for not coming last, but I made the final, and that was my main objective, was to make the final. And I did that. So I was happy about that. But I remember rewatching the replay, and Dad's like recording me on the phone. I think it was Dad. Mum or Dad was recording me on the phone. And you sort of see like on the very edge of the screen, one guy like dive and fall over the line as they finished. So there was this epic, first and second place type battle. And, they're recording me back here on the little, flip phones back in the day or whatever. So you can barely make out what's happening.
Yeah.
But it was a pretty, it was a pretty cool event to be part of. But I was, 400 meter run. I was never that great. I never broke 50 seconds. I think 50.4 or something was about my best time.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite lucky in my 7th form year lucky for me, because there were no other like real high caliber sprinters at Palmy Boys that year. Everyone was, there were some really good sportsmen, like we had Kurt Baker, who went on NZ7s, Simon van Veldhoven, who is Emirates Team New Zealand and was Olympic cyclist. There's a bunch of names there. Aaron Cruden, he was in my 7th form year. So there was a lot of, good athletes, but there wasn't any like real. Andre Taylor was in there as well.
Yep.
So there were a bunch of good lads, but yeah, I was lucky. So I managed to take at Palmy Boys. You can do 2 track events. You can only choose 2 track events and 2 field events. You could enter 4 events total, and then they have a series of events that are like open events. So they're just things anyone can do. A bit more like left field events. So it might be like the steeplechase, the race walk. And the 60 meter sprint is in there as well.
Yeah.
Oh, the race walk is the funniest one, because it just ends up with all these people just jumping in to do it. Like,
and it would be all in everyone house colours as well, is it?
Yeah, because I think it only happened. Well, at least I think back in the day it used to happen, and everyone would just jump onto the track at once if you wanted to do the race walk type thing. Well, they might have done it in the morning. So yeah, I did the 2 and the 4 because I knew that I had the better chance at those, and then I did the 60. So I didn't actually do the main event, the 100 meter, because I figured if I won the 60 and I won the 200, then I could claim like technically I knew that I could win the 100. The real reason was I knew I had a better chance at winning the 2 and the 4, the 200 than I did the 100.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I managed to come away winning the 60, the 2 and the 4, which was a pretty good outcome for me, because I wasn't, as I say, the best athlete, but I was fortunate that there weren't any sort of, real stud type athletes in terms of the sprints that year. But my claim to fame is that I beat Andre Taylor over 60. So,
nice.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah, I was watching actually a video of Kurt Baker, especially when he was in the 7s. He was like the only person that would kick the ball. And I think it took a very long time for him to wear Gordon Ditchins down to the idea of kicking the ball in 7s. And then, of course, with the new coach, Laidlaw, did he kick it all the time? But yeah, he's playing over, I think, for New York.
Yeah, he's over in the US at the moment. I think he might be back now, because I follow him on Instagram.
No, it was a video today. So he just put the magnificent punt from his own 22 all the way down the other end.
I swear that I saw something with him being home, but I mean, yeah, that's just me watching the old Facebook stories. But who knows? They could be putting highlights up from the.
Yeah, but he is a weapon, eh? And Simon van Veldhoven, he had obviously spent a lot of time down in Southland on the boards there, and then up to Cambridge. So on that, has Eddie Dawkins pushed on in the powerlifting rounds?
I haven't followed him too much in terms of how he's actually gone.
Yeah.
But I from what I had seen, he was getting pretty strong, because I was going to go down to do the nationals again in 2021. But as we arrived in Christchurch and we were going to head down to Dunedin, that was when that COVID, Delta case or whatever happened up in Auckland or wherever it was, with the one that was traveling somewhere. And they locked everyone down, and so they cancelled nationals. So the Masters Nationals was finished that year. So I would have seen him competing that year, but then I haven't competed again basically in powerlifting since then. And that was just a little bit of a comeback. I nothing special, because the devotion to it isn't the same as it was. But yeah, should we get back to my story? Sorry, I keep getting distracted here.
No, it's all right. We digress.
So that was sprints, and I carried on doing that a little bit outside of high school. But the thing that tends to happen with athletics in New Zealand, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but back in my day, 15 odd years back, it was pretty much after the secondary school athletics, there just wasn't the same number of competitors coming through. You go to national secondary schools athletics champs, and it's probably bigger than the national champs of athletics. It's just such a big event and a real, highlight of the secondary school calendar for athletics. And so I sort of just, was competing for a bit, and then I was like, I just got to stop competing now. And I always enjoyed the lifting side of the athletics training. It was one of the things as I said, I wasn't like a really talented athlete. I was one of those people that sort of had to work quite hard to get the results. And so I really enjoyed that training process, and I really enjoyed going to the gym and, lifting. And I had a coach, Mr. Doyle, or Digger Doyle as he's known. He passed away earlier this year. So RIP to Digger Doyle. He was a good man, and he got me into training properly. He took me through different sort of periodized approaches to athletics. We'd do like a hypertrophy or muscular endurance block, and then we'd do a strength block, and then we'd do a power block, and we'd be doing big compound movements. And I really enjoyed that. One of my training partners, he was probably the opposite. So when Digger would go back down to Christchurch and see his mum in the holidays, we'd get keys to the school gym. And I'd basically end up sitting there, I'd end up training, and, Sean, my mate, who was a significantly more talented athlete than me, and he enjoyed training on the track. He just hated the gym. He'd sit there on the chair basically and just watch me train for an hour, and then we'd go home. But I sort of fell in love with lifting then. So when I stopped the athletics, I carried on with the lifting. I had a dabble in a half marathon back then when I was probably about 20 years old. Just, because I enjoyed the running still, and I did a bit of that. But then after that, I sort of started to take powerlifting a bit seriously, competed in 2010. I think the end of 2010 was my first comp.
How did you make that leap?
I was kind of just training those big three lifts, the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift regularly. And I was fairly strong at them. And I guess that comes with being a power athlete, is that fast twitch type thing. There's a bit of carryover between that power and that strength.
What gym were you in there?
Type movement. I didn't even know where I was training at that stage. Probably just the Massey gym still, I think.
Was Massey, like Auckland gym, had just this core group, and then a couple of old fellas for some reason that used to train in there. I don't know whether they were just like finding young talent to pull through and sort of living vicariously through younger people, or what it was. But was that a little bit of the case in the Massey gym?
No, I would for a while there, I was kind of just training on my own, and I've always been okay with training on my own, but I prefer training with other people, but I've never had an issue with, getting in and doing the work myself. Yeah. So I was training on my own most of the time, but I had a few other friends who would lift to some degree. So they might come along and they wouldn't take it necessarily as seriously as me. But there was another guy who ended up actually coming to comps with me a few years later, Jono, and we've been to a couple world champs together. And still train together to this day. So that sort of friendship has carried on throughout those years and into the now, where we're both relatively new dads. He's got 2 kids, beat me to the second one, but we had the first one before him, so he was pretty quick for number 2.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really anyone in Palmerston North doing powerlifting. It was one of those things where there was one of the guys who actually ended up being my PhD supervisor. He sort of had seen me training, and he knew that I was lifting, decent weights. I had no idea, because I was just training for fun more than anything else and wanting, enjoying getting stronger. And he said, "Oh, you should try this powerlifting thing," because he knew a few like older dudes who had done it years before that were his friends that he had associations with through work and through these different things. And so he kind of just said, "Oh, you should try this powerlifting thing." And obviously, being a competitive person, I've done athletics, I've done rugby. It was a way that I could kind of keep training, but have a bit of, a bit more purpose and a bit more direction with competitions.
Have a goal again in training. Yeah.
Which for me is something that's actually, throughout the years has always been important. Like if I have an event that I'm aiming for or something, it just helps to keep me honest, helps me to keep working hard and to turn up on those days where otherwise, you might not.
Yeah.
So I competed in 2010, it went all right. And then back then there was only one division in powerlifting. So I don't know if you've ever watched equipped powerlifting or geared powerlifting, sometimes they'll call it.
Yeah.
Where, the bench press guys, they walk out like this and their arms are stuck forward. So back in that day, there wasn't what they call the raw division. So everyone competed or had the option to compete with powerlifting equipment, which essentially the way that I can best describe it is if you imagine squatting in a really tight pair of jeans that wouldn't rip on you, it would make it really hard to go down, but it will help you come back up out of the hole. So, and then the bench shirts are basically the same sort of philosophy, which is why, if you're not watching, my arms are in front of me, like straight out ahead, and it sort of resists the movement down again and helps you up. And so equipped powerlifting was the only way you could compete back in 2010 and I think even 2011. And it's a little bit of a barrier to entry, and that's probably a bit why the sport back then, I guess, wasn't as popular as it is today or as well known as it is today, because, you'd see these guys wearing these funny bench shirts. They'd be, that might add, tens of kilos, probably more for some people, to their lifts. So not only does it look a bit weird, the people are lifting weights that look untouchable to you, like it doesn't seem within reach. Although to be fair, nowadays people are probably lifting that, but raw, just because of the sheer talent, that's in the sport these days. Just based on those pure more numbers, means that there's more cream at the top, right?
Yeah.
So 2010, I had my first comp, went pretty well. I enjoyed it. My mum told me that I think her words were, "You've done some pretty strange things in your time, but this one takes the cake," which I thought was a fairly true statement, because if you can imagine, this was like back in the early days of powerlifting. So awesome gym if you're a powerlifter, like fantastic place to train. But if you're not a powerlifter, you kind of think of it as it almost looked like a bit of a dungeon, like this big open type dungeon concrete gym with just, straight metal plates everywhere. The squat racks were made by the owner of the gym, like they were, they were sort of welded himself sort of thing, like they weren't a nice pre-purchase set that looked beautiful. It was solid metal put together well. It was that kind of thing, and that was where the first comp was. And so that's why Mum made that comment to me afterwards, and I sort of, but that was kind of the culture of powerlifting back then. It was a bit of a niche sport where you'd have to be searching for it to find it.
How long was it in the States for?
What's that, sorry?
How long was it in the States? Like who are the
like
guys
West Side and stuff?
Yeah.
Well, it's been around for years. Like the sport itself, like in New Zealand, we've had world champions from back in, I think, the 80s and stuff.
Right. Okay.
So, but it was just the equipment probably came along around the 80s, 90s type frame, and obviously that advanced. And so there were quite a few splits that happened in the Powerlifting Federation, because around those earlier days, drugs popped up, and then there became the WADA drug testing. And so the federation that I competed in is called the International Powerlifting Federation. So at the time, and I think they still are, the biggest, most well recognized. They go to the World Game, although the sport is at the World Games in the IPF format. So if you think of it a bit like boxing, how there's all these different belts and these different federations, that's kind of like what you've got in powerlifting. So the IPF you could consider as like some people would argue the point, but it's probably the most like true federation in terms of like a typical sport. Like that's like your FIFA of football, or maybe your PGA of golf compared to your, what is it, WIN, that kind of thing. So the IPF is kind of the most prestigious and most competed in around the world. And it's got the drug testing, it's got the strictest rules, all those sorts of things. So it's really well respected. And then the other federations might allow for more equipment. They might end up being a bit more lenient in terms of like the squat depth and things like that aren't quite as harsh or aren't judged quite as harshly. And so you'll see lifts in that federation that wouldn't pass, in the IPF. So it's always been there. But Westside would have been in the multiply. So if you think of what I said about the jeans, this time you've got 2 pairs of jeans on, basically. You've got double the thickness or triple the thickness. So you get like even more and more and more out of the equipment. It's kind of, if you go from a single ply, which is what the IPF's equip division was and still is, then you got multiply. So it's basically more layers of these tight jeans that you're squatting into and getting more rebound out of. But that was one of those things at that time for me. It was even more of a barrier, right? Because I didn't have a gym in Palmy that had people that were experienced with using how to put a bench shirt on, how to fit it properly, how to, do all of those things. So thankfully for me, I think it was end of 2011 or start of 2012, the IPF brought in a raw division. And I was just like, fantastic. Like, this makes my life so much easier. I can just train, and my normal stuff, like a soft suit type wrestling suit at a comp. I don't have to get any of these fancy, expensive pieces of kit and figure out how to use them, because that's the challenge with the equipment. Is there's a real big skill component to that, and if you don't have other people to kind of teach you that skill, it's really hard to get yourself.
And that would be imported as well, was it? Wouldn't you go down to Rebel Sport and pick yourself up
not a chance, mate.
Suit,
that was back in the days of forums. And so that was kind of how you'd source something, because you'd be on the forums with the other powerlifters. So that gym that I mentioned that I competed at the first comp, they had a powerhouse gym forum. And so all of the people from the central districts, like here to sort of middle of the North Island, would basically, that was the gym, that was the cool place. And there was another couple of options in Hawke's Bay and stuff. So if you weren't at one of those gyms, you didn't have the kit to get. So you'd go through forums and you'd figure out someone was selling one in this size and that's about right, and I'll grab that, or whatever it was. So when they got rid of that, having to, and it wasn't that you had to compete like that, but if you didn't compete with it, you're at a significant disadvantage. So that was kind of the initial phase for powerlifting for me. I did it raw and I was like, this is cool. And then I went to nationals and I'm like, geez, this is hard. These people are squatting like so much more than me. So when raw came along, I was like, right, this is something I can get into. And so I basically dropped using any of the equipment that I had purchased, just basically got rid of it, because I was like, meh, I'm going to compete the way that seems normal. Like what I would have done for training for sprinting, right? I would have chucked a bar on my back and done a squat. I wouldn't have had to fart around with some fancy suit. And full respect to those that do, because there's definitely a massive skill element to that, and it's almost a different sport, to be fair. And then that came in 2012, and that was the first year I went to an Oceania champs. So I'd managed to progress a bit in those couple of years, and I think I might have gone up to 93s prior to that comp, like mid-year of 2012. So I probably would have got up to around 89, 90 type kilos. And then I thought, man, if I want to have a chance at Oceanias, I'm going to have to cut or go into the 83s, and so
you were sort of between the two ranges there, were you?
Yeah, because I wasn't a full 93, but I was about 5 or 6 kilos over the 83. So I did a bit of a slow weight cut down to get into the 83 class and sort of sit between 83 and 84 type things, that you just have to do a little bit of a basically go toilet the morning before weigh-in or not eat carbs for a day before. Like, it didn't have to be a big, week-long water load or anything crazy like that.
Yeah, there must be a comp on tomorrow, because one of the guys who's a hunter, he's put up today, he's been sitting in the sauna and eating not much. He had to lose 16 pounds before tomorrow. So, yeah, I don't know how he's getting on. About 2 o'clock this afternoon, he had knocked off 8 of them. So then he had a photo of his dinner, which was a knife and fork and an ice cube. So, yeah, yeah, good luck.
But I got back to the 83s for that, and thankfully, again, for me, I seem to have this luck, right, that when I compete in these sports or compete in something, and do all right, that there's not that many other big competitors around. And the sport wasn't that big back then, because it was the start of this raw division. So it was the first, raw Oceanias. And so I managed to win that championship. I think there was only about 4 in our division, so that that kind of tells you something. But it was one of those things where it was like, oh man, I'm doing all right here, and I'm still progressing, and I've cut to the 83s for this, but I'd actually prefer to be a bit heavier and just take a bit of time and get to a fuller 93. And so I sort of did that, and by this stage I had managed to con Jono into coming and starting powerlifting, and we were training together in my garage. We got a 3 new segment prior to our world championships.
Nice.
Which was pretty cool for powerlifting, because it wasn't even on the radar back then. I think with Eddie Dawkins, I've done a few segments on 3 news and those sorts of things with him. Hawkins or Dawkins?
Dawkins, yeah. Dawkins is right. Yeah.
Shouldn't have second guessed myself there. I had it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool, because they came down to our garage in Palmy. They brought the camera and the reporter, and it was quite an interesting. Ross Carl, I think it was. I think he does some of the bigger sports now, but they must have been putting him on the small jobs back then.
And you went to Russia, right?
Yeah, so 2013 was Russia. So we went to a little town called Suzdal in Russia, which is, I think it's sort of east of Moscow. So we flew into Moscow for that one. And the distance that it should have been is roughly from Palmy to Topor, like in terms of how far away it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it took us 7 hours to get there by bus. And we were in a bus with the Japanese team. I think it was, John and I, the Japanese team, and everyone was like packed in like sardines to this thing with all the bags in the center. Going to a place like that makes you very thankful, even for the state of our roads. Like over there, man, like it was intense. There's just big holes just randomly, and so you'll be like, when we were going once we were in Suzdal and we were going from the venue into town, and it wasn't much of a town. Like this would have been probably, I reckon, the size of Bulls, but you go from the venue, which Bulls doesn't have a venue like that, but I think we got told that it was where the Soviet like leaders used to go to,
right?
Because there's like a big theater, it has a hotel on it, all these sorts of things which you wouldn't get in a normal small town. So we were told that it was like a secret, Soviet leaders meeting place back in the day. It probably wasn't at all, but that was the rumor.
It was just straight communist money. Every town, no matter the size, gets a theater and a venue. Yeah.
But like when you're traveling from the venue into town and stuff, it was like, honestly, the Uber wouldn't have been Uber back in the day, must have been taxis, but they just be able to scoot around the holes because they know exactly where they were. So they'd be cruising along, and then suddenly they just like go around this hole. It was so random, but you sort of finished there and came back thankful. And the other part that I was really like confused by when I was over there, or not confused by, it was just like, oh man, we do have it pretty good. Like no one maintains the sidewalks.
Right.
So like in the center of town, you would just have random like long bits of grass just sitting there. No one's sort of maintaining or mowing it. So, there's probably not a local council that's got some guy on a mowing contract going around.
No. Was there an accurate situation there? Like 2015, like did all the Russians win?
There was actually so Jono and I, we were the only 2 Kiwis there, I believe, at that stage. I don't think we even had any refs that year. So we went to like the pre-event like meeting where you confirm the entries and, the officials turn up. But because we were the only 2 there, was there one other? We did have one other. We had, have I forgotten her name? She was world champion.
Not the lady from Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, I feel like
I just read this before. Is it like Sonia or something like that?
Yeah, Manina. Sonia Manina, I think it is. I haven't had anything to do with her since powerlifting, which is some years ago, but I mean, I should remember that. So she was the one, but she turned up later than us. But at that pre-event meeting, there was this funny thing done, because obviously we know Russia and Ukraine now, what's going on there. But essentially what they did was the Russian Powerlifting Federation paid for an additional, like, I can't remember if it was 50 or 100 drug tests to be done at the competition. But a whole lot of their athletes weren't there. But everyone else had turned up. But obviously, this is what we assumed, was that like they put on these extra tests. Anyone who they knew was going to fail, they had taken out of it, and rah. But I mean, again, it's just a bit of speculation. And I think us in the West, we love to we love to throw stones at that sort of stuff. So when we saw that they'd put on extra tests and suddenly, there were these few Russians that were really good that weren't actually competing anymore because they were injured, we were like, oh, well, that seems like a bit of a setup to catch out all these Ukrainians who are already here. Or Kazakhs it was, not the Ukrainians, it was the Kazakhs that they really didn't like.
I've confirmed that name for us. It's Sonia Manina. Yeah, you were right.
I thought it was Manina. Yeah.
And
yeah, she was good, man. She was like one of the first world champions we had, I think, in terms of the raw division. But yeah, they didn't turn up to a bit later. So it was me and John at that first meeting. And that was the controversy was, they've put on these tests to catch out the Kazakh lifters. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Did you watch Icarus pretty early on, and did you mind get cast back straight away?
I don't know. I think in the West we always have this thing against the Russians. Like it's something that kind of, at least in sport, you know what I mean? Like that they're dodgy or they're not doing things correctly. And I mean, there's probably some truth to it from back in the Soviet era, but everyone was probably doing it back then. I mean, look at the Americans back then as well, and some of the athletes they had, and some of the Olympic results, and stuff that happened. I think everyone was a bit guilty of it, and probably a lot of the Western nations have cleaned things up significantly since then. But a lot of it's the culture, eh? Like it's a completely different environment and different, reason for doing sport for some of those countries as well. Like it's a way to get a livelihood. It's a way to look after your family. Whereas for a lot of our, a lot of the Western athletes, and I mean, I don't want to justify it because I'm, I believe in anti-doping and I'm strongly for catching cheats and that, but the culture of it does impact why someone would make a decision like that, right? It's not as simple as, I can just go back to New Zealand and get my job and carry on with my life. Like you might have been selected at a young age and put into an Olympic program and all of those things. So there's a lot of pressure on some of those athletes, and maybe even sometimes they don't actually necessarily know what's happening because they probably have a doctor that gives them vitamins and all sorts, like.
Have you listened to, I don't know his last name, Zane, the distance?
Yeah, I did listen to that on the Dom Harvey one. Yeah.
And like, I sort of had the thought of like, again, throwing stones. Can you hear about it? Like, they're just, blood dope all the time, and it's the strongest survives, and it's just like that part of the reason they're so successful is it's so cut loose, and there's a junior period where nobody's being tested, and then it's kind of like, we better stop now.
Yeah. Like it's funny with those things, because like I met a couple of Russian guys over there, David and Amir, and they were sons of the, like, I think it was the vice president of the Russian Powerlifting Federation at the time. And obviously powerlifting over there is much bigger than it is over here, or was over here. It's still, not like a national sport. Like we think of the Russians and we're like, they just all love weightlifting and powerlifting, or at least that's what us Kiwi strength athletes think.
Yeah, Dmitry Klokov is like everybody.
Yeah, like everyone loves, the sport and wants to be, and it's like, well, I don't think it's quite that popular, but it's a lot more popular than it is here. And there's a genuine, national program that works towards, making athletes good at it, but it's not like it's a national, or at least in my opinion, it didn't appear that it was like a, national sport and there's, big billboards with, Klokov on them and those sorts of things. But yeah, I think the doping thing is really hard, because it is something that there is so much to be said for how we take it seriously in the West, or in certain countries that have a system, and are really good at catching people because we actually do all the out of competition testing. We do all of those things because it's something that for our ethics and our, morals and our way of viewing the world, it's really important to us that things are considered fair, right? Whereas it may not be the same in terms of the culture over there. And it's hard to kind of put that into your brain and think of it that way, I think, sometimes. But by the same token, it's not like they don't know the rules, you know, and it's not like the presidents of the federations and the, all the coaches don't understand what's going on. I mean, the athletes sometimes, maybe not, because some of them are pretty young and maybe a bit naive to some of the stuff. But to be fair, the coaches know, the sporting administrators know, they all know the rules. So it's kind of like, you can feel a little bit sorry for some of the people that are caught in the system, but I don't think you can feel sorry for the fact they get banned, I don't know, man. Strength sports are weird like that, but then I think, cycling's been just as bad and all these other things. It's just when you hear strength, you think testosterone, right? And you think steroids.
On the other side of it, like I've been privileged enough, gone to elite sport. My dad's sort of coached at elite level.
Mm.
I flattered with someone who did a what was it, sports science at Auckland University, and then lived with one of the strength and conditioning coaches at High Performance Sport and around Tom Walsh and his coaches and stuff like that. So getting to be privy to some of these conversations and programmings and things like that. Like you said, the sport of powerlifting had been around it a while, sort of, literal garage type sport. And then you're at university, turns out your PhD supervisor is into it. What was it like to sort of bring it into the 21st century, apply, sports have taken strength and conditioning to them, but to actually apply strength and conditioning to strength and power as a sport, what was that like? And to really dive into the research of really specific stuff.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because with powerlifting as a sport, it's one of those ones that actually sports science seems to be really commonly like read and thought about,
right?
In strength sports, and I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because it's accessible, right? And also it's quite simple, in its context. Like it's not like a rugby game where it's dynamic and you need strength, you need power, you need endurance, you need all of these things. With powerlifting, it's a pretty known quantity, right? There's 3 movements. They happen, in a certain manner, and there's certain standards you have to hit, and it's not like the barbell just jumps out of nowhere at you, right? So it's quite easy to measure.
My flatmate, even though he was interested in rowing, his honors project was using a bench press. Again, like you say, controllable variables, I guess.
And I guess that's the thing, like, because strength is so often something we use to train for other sports. Strength training is something we use to train other sports. We kind of know, or it's used as a model for measuring training response and those sorts of things. So I guess it's always been part of that. I think initially a lot of sports science was in cycling because, that's more controllable than running, right? You can measure watts, you have someone on a bike in front of you, you can take blood from them very easily. It's all very simple to do.
You can shove a thermometer up their bum.
Oh, I've done that.
So my brother.
On myself. I remember actually we were in, I think, second or third year of the degree, and this guy comes in, one of the lecturers at the time in the strength and conditioning space, and he goes, I've got this project and it's really simple. We're going to put you on a vibration platform and we're just looking at what happens to the muscle temperature and blah 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 and all these different things. And then he's like, what we need for the procedure is we're going to take this temperature and we're going to do this and that, and we're going to put a rectal thermometer in and blah blah blah. And everyone's like, whoa, like I was on board with this simple experiment. What do you mean you're going to put a thermometer up my bum? Like, it's one of those things that it sounds really bad, but honestly bad. Like, and it's not actually that bad. Like, it's how big is the end? Like, it's basically, if you think of a wire, so it's just like basically a wire, and then on the end of it is almost just like a little, I don't know.
It's like not a butt plug anyway.
It's a little bead. Yeah, no, it's not. It's very, very small. Like I'd say, as I look at my thing plugging into my mic here, it would probably be smaller than that at the tip of it. Like it's not even the same size as what you'd push into your microphone.
Not as big as an aux
jack.
Yeah.
So like it, and it is weird. It is weird. And we're going to go into the details. So I think you have to go like 10 centimeters, I think was how far it was. And so what the researcher would do, because I didn't volunteer for that experiment. It was once I became a postgraduate student, I realized if I want people to volunteer for my studies, I'm going to have to volunteer for their studies.
Right.
And so I was like, I better do some of it. Like, I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and do it. But they give you this, the cord there, and it's like a blue long tube, basically just a real couple mils thick, like I mentioned, but they put a bead at the 10 centimeter mark and they give you a tub of Vaseline.
What is an anal bead?
And so you essentially just have to push this thermometer up until you feel the bead. And so then you've gone further enough in, and you sort of just that's how you've gone enough to get the accurate measurement for the day.
Yeah, the School of Physio what are they? School of Phys Ed in Dunedin. They've benefited a lot from from the Otago University rowing crew going to China and needing to see
acclimatise and stuff.
how heat affects performance, and who needs chili pads?
Oh man, we did some shocking ones. We had a guy at university. So this was prior to I think I might have just started competing in powerlifting around then, been doing a little bit of other stuff. But we had this guy from America who was doing like perceived heat.
Mm-hmm.
So what he would do is you'd be cycling in this like black suit that has essentially cords all through it, like little tubing that has water traveling all through it. And so there's a water bath that sits next to you that's at 55 degrees or something. And so the water cools to maybe high 40s or whatever it is by the time it's in there. And it's going round and round in this black suit. And so you just can't escape it, right? Because if you had a hot room, you could sweat, and you'd probably be able to offset a bit of body heat. But you're essentially wearing a wetsuit with these cords on it. So essentially you can't offset your heat very well at all. But then the whole purpose of the experiment, I think there are about 6 different conditions. And each one had something different applied to your face. So you had your normal control condition. So that was just, you were just ambient, and you had to ride to a 16 RPE,
right?
Which is somewhere between hard and very hard the whole time, right? So it's just all perception based. So one of the conditions, you have a just open face. It's just normal. There's nothing's happening, ambient. So your head isn't in the heater, isn't in the hot suit, right? Your head's out, because that would probably be quite unethical. There's a heater on one of the conditions, literally like a little fan heater that they put in front of you, just blowing hot air onto your face as you're cycling. There's another one that's like a nice fan, so that was cooling. But then the other 2 conditions were a menthol, so it was a perceived cooling sensation, like it wasn't actually cooling you down. But the last condition was capsaicin.
Oof.
So like basically rubbing your face with chili powder. So that essentially apply this.
Unethical? Fuck.
Every time you're putting you've got these goggles on, so you've got like swimming goggles on your face so that the capsaicin can't get into your eyes. It was probably one of the worst things I've ever done. But to make it worse for myself, you have to control like everything, right? So you essentially got, the same exercise routine leading up to it, the day before off, whatever it might be. You don't change anything. And then you have the same meal 2 hours before. Being a uni student with the Musa shop, I made a really fatal mistake that I bought before the first one. I had a litre of Mountain Dew, a bag of Doritos, and a chicken sandwich from the shop, like a good student would. And then I realized after the first time that I was going to have to go to the Musa shop and buy that exact same meal for the next 6 visits to the lab. It was shocking, eh?
Good to hear that the controls were put into place. But yes, I do want to have witnessed that ethics discussion.
I don't know how they got that through, man. Let's rub capsaicin on people's faces and make them exercise. I mean, maybe it was because the RPE was, it was hard, but it wasn't like a maximal test. So potentially that's how they got it across the line. But man, it was one of the worst experiences of my life, that capsaicin one.
That's
you just can't get away from it.
Perceived exertion, right?
Yeah. So you're riding to 16 RPE on the Borg scale, which I can still hear Zach, who was the experimenter, somewhere between hard and very hard, and he's got this big, thick American accent going on as well.
I think that suit is the suit that they did a lot of the Wim Hof testing in. Yeah,
potentially a similar thing.
Yeah, they obviously made him really cold. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of the weirdest experiments that I got involved in. I mean, it was a cool thing because it was kind of seeing how the perception, when the physiological part is the same, basically, right? Your temperature's, being heated up to the same extent, just seeing kind of what happened. And I think I was one of the ones who had sort of the worst effects when I had the capsaicin and the heater trials. And I could believe that, man, because when I try running, it's hot. It's a bad time. So if you make me feel even hotter, I'm not that surprised looking back, that if I was one of the ones who had the worst performances comparatively, because I don't think there was that big of a dip as what you would anticipate when you hear that in your head, like capsaicin rubbed on your face while wearing a 50-degree hot suit and cycling. Surely that's going to be worse than the fan.
What was the end marker? Your perceived how shit you felt?
So I think it's a few years ago now. I think that you were cycling for a certain period of time total.
Mm-hmm.
And so because you were cycling to an RPE, your wattage was covered. And so you had no idea how hard you were actually cycling. So I think there was a standardized
Okay, so
you could change your resistance.
Your feeling, and then what was your output?
Yeah, so they were looking at the output. So purely it was like, hey, you're riding to the 16 RPE. And so you had like a familiarization. Then you had, these trials were all randomized in order, and there was that control one amongst it, so there was the whole, learning effect and training effect was all sort of taken into account by that order randomization.
And what was the outcome of that? Do you remember?
I don't think they actually saw much of an impact. I'd have to look it up because I basically did it and then forgot about it, right? Because it's the guy's PhD and I was just doing my part of his PhD and I was just helping him out because he needed participants. So I was like, well, I'll jump in and I'll do that. That sounds all right. I've already done a thermometer at my bum in a previous trial, so it's not going to be too bad, surely.
Oh, you kept saying it in my face. I had a look at your citations. You're 212 or something, and I read for you a couple of abstracts. Smelling salts, mate, don't do shit.
Yeah, well, supposedly not. So we did a few on those, and I mean, I think there's been a couple of studies that have shown some like minimal impacts. The thing for me that I think would be quite interesting would be if you're looking at something like ammonia, kind of putting people into different groups, because you know how people operate differently based on their state of arousal. There's some people that like to be like, real amped up and real hyped up. There's other people that prefer to be calm or a bit more mellow. Like we had a guy that we used to train with.
Have a sleep and then wake up.
We had a guy that would literally listen to love songs before he went and did his powerlifting. we were just like, how does that work? Like, how does that make you want to go and lift a really heavy weight? Like, but he's full on like just like love songs, just chill as music, happy as feelings and all that stuff. I'm like, give me the Disturbed, like I'm not normally a Disturbed type of guy. Or yeah. And what was the one that I've so for my best ever squat, which was 272 kilos in South Africa. So that was Worlds the year after Russia. And I still can like vividly remember the little bit to the side of the stage when you're getting ready, and it was The Beautiful People by Marilyn Manson, that and like that
yes,
and that was like just as loud as it could be in my ears, like as I went out. And I can still vividly remember that, Jono takes off the headphones and you walk up the steps and there it is, like but that would be interesting to me, is like those people who prefer that real hyped up thing. Because when you look at a set of data, essentially, right, we're just pulling everyone together. And I haven't looked in great detail at the different responses, because a lot of the ammonia stuff I did was with like some other collaborators who did the data analysis side of that. And so I didn't take, a really hard look at all the individual changes and think, oh, that guy's like that and that guy's like that. But I'd be quite interested to kind of divide them into groups, like the groups of lifters that kind of say that they like to be really amped up and fired up before a heavy lift. And then the others who might not be quite, they'd prefer to be focused and, thinking about the task, whatever it might be, whatever those groups of the psychological aspects would be, and then give them the ammonia, So like, do we actually see that the group that says that they like to be hyped up, do they actually get anything from it? And then, the same thing, does it make these guys worse, which could even out that effect, right? If you were to then look at your results across the study. And then the other aspect that we didn't look into, and I think some later groups have, and I don't think, again, this is speaking out of turn because I'm not super up to date with the literature of late, but the fatigue aspect, because when we look at powerlifting and we think about anecdotally when people tended to use smelling salts the most, it tends to be on the deadlift, which is the last lift of the day, right? So you've already gone out, got hyped up and amped up like 6 times prior before you start your deadlift, like full peak, trying to lift as much as you can essentially on those, or very close to it for most of those attempts. So by the time you get to your deadlift, you can be quite drained mentally and not quite switched on. So that's where I think for some people that fatigue aspect could be quite an interesting place to look at it, because obviously it's like a slap in the face, right? I don't know if you've ever used smelling salts. And interestingly enough, this is probably the bias I have, and the reason why I think this would be interesting is because on my squat and my deadlift, I generally use smelling salts. When I was actually a good lifter. These days, why would I bother? But basically, you know, like those are the lifts where I have to be hyped up, or I like to be hyped up. I prefer to be hyped up. But on bench, I don't, you know, like I'd have a different playlist that I would use for my squat to my bench, you know, to my deadlift. Like it might be like 660 or something, you know, catch a fire, that type of thing when I'm benching, because for me, it's a really technical lift. It's something I really need to focus on to get right. Whereas a deadlift, you know, there's technique, but also there's an element of, it's quite simple, right? You go out there and you pick it up, you know, whereas with a bench press, there's a start command, there's a press command, there's a rack command. You've got to be quite alert throughout that whole thing, so you don't miss anything, or you don't go early on your press or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's just the two things with the ammonia stuff. Yeah, we haven't really seen much, and it doesn't appear that there's much of an effect, but it's one of those things that I kind of feel like if a lifter or someone feels like it helps them, or it helps psych them up, or helps get them in the zone, it's not expensive.
No. So
you're not really risking anything there, right? Not having to invest in buying a $1,000 piece of kit. It's literally go buy a $15 or whatever it might be these days, inflation, maybe $20, I don't know, for a thing of smelling salts to have a sniff of, you know, like it's not that that challenging. And then the other thing with the research is it's bloody hard to blind for ammonia capture, isn't it?
cat wheeze and ammonia. I don't know, but it's probably still enough. It's
probably still ammonia in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's one of the ones that I've done a little bit of collaboration with, and I think I've actually got I wrote one a couple of years back for Stronger by Science, like a general, you know, article on their website about the smelling salt stuff. I think that's what I did for them a couple of years back. Yeah. And yeah, basically it's that we're not seeing any benefit, but it's again one of those things where it's not expensive, it's not hard to do. If you get a benefit, great. If you don't, then don't waste your time. Like,
what was your PhD?
So my PhD was tapering for maximal strength, was essentially the whole thing. So I started that in 2014, and 2014 was the same year as I last competed in powerlifting, before I did my little tiny couple of comps back in 2021. My last year of being decent, you know, a decent high level competitor and devoting time to it. So I started that in 2014. Basically we did a few studies. The first one was a little bit of a literature review just around what was known at the time, and it was very little. And so we basically looked at what was there, and we looked at tapering studies, like in particular, so where they actually do reduce their training volume and or intensity or training load, I guess you could call it, in those last week or two, or however long it might be before that comp. And then also training cessation, so just taking, you know, a number of days completely off from training. So you might train normally and then just take 3 days off, or you might train normally and take 2 days off, and just looking at what was kind of known or seen. And there wasn't a hell of a lot, and most of it was in people who weren't strength athletes. So you might have been looking at a strength outcome in a group of rugby league players, you know, or something like that. So we did that first one, and essentially
was that like preseason testing type stuff?
Yeah. So because often when you're trying to do these studies, you need to have like two groups, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes it's easy if you've got an S&C coach who can just pretty much say, you guys are doing this, you guys are doing this. You can often do a few more of these studies or these interventions, because, you know, a bit of a taper at the end of a training block or not, like it's not going to affect the long-term training thing. Whereas if we were saying, you guys are going to do this type of training and you guys are going to do this, we think this one's less effective. Of course, the S&C coach isn't going to say yes to making that happen. So that was our first one, just looking at what was there, and essentially, you know, it was fairly similar to what people said for the aerobic, which was, you know, intensity could be maintained or slightly reduced, and then we should focus on reducing training volume, or, you know, total number of working sets across that week or two before the comp.
So that was a literature review.
Yeah, and then we did 1, 2, 3 further studies. One of them was interviewing powerlifters at the time, competitive powerlifters who had essentially, you know, achieved a certain body weight type score, you know, like in New Zealand, and we looked at a bunch of those. I think we had 9 or 11, can't remember. Again, I should have looked at this before we had this chat. It's all available on the internet.
Yeah. I read some of the abstracts. They're good reading.
Typical science stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we did that where we interviewed them and sort of saw what they did, and then we did 2 other studies. One was a training cessation study with 3.5 or 5.5 days off, which just worked out that most people trained in the afternoon. So rather than being 4 and 6, it was 3.5 and 5.5. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. And we saw basically in that one there, so we gave them, I think it was a 4-week training block followed by that period of time off, and then we crossed them over, right? So the same athletes repeated the other condition that they hadn't done the first time around. And we saw that there was a beneficial effect of the time off, but there wasn't like one duration wasn't necessarily better than the other. So essentially, you could take, pretty sure it was 3.5 and 5.5.
So did they end up with a new benchmark at the end of that training block though?
It's hard with that stuff because it would be compared, when we're looking at it, we're comparing it with the first test that we did on them. So it may not have been like a lifetime PR, but it would have been generally better than before they started the training, if that makes sense. Again, I'd have to look at the exact numbers again to refresh myself with the exact changes and stuff that they had. And that's one of the limitations as well with tapering, right? Is where do you compare it with? Because if you compare it with just the pre-taper and to the post-taper, you'd probably anticipate there's going to be a bigger change. But actually, the more important one is probably the pre-taper versus, the post-taper versus the pre-training, right? Yeah.
And was the test just in training test, or did they have an event?
It was all just in training stuff.
Yeah.
So it was like essentially we gave them the training, we supervised them, we remember they came into the lab for the testing, we did all that stuff with them, and then it was just basically a test in the lab. So that was one of the other things that we were looking at potentially doing if we were to do any other sort of training studies like that, was to have a gym-based test as well. And there's another guy, Kyle Travis, who's done some research after us, who's looked more at the actual outcomes and what people have done in practice. So when we did the interviews, it was more of a what do you do and why, whereas he had a little bit more in there around did it work, which is probably something that we should have asked, was did it work, and what counts as working? Like how much of an improvement would you say is it worked? Because that's always the hard part with these things, right? Is it's like,
did you win the competition, or did you improve?
Yeah, like, oh cool, you did this taper and you said when it went bad this happens. But actually when we look at it, when we just look at it in general, it's like, well, you do that, but how often does it work? And are you better from that than you normally are? Like,
and that goes back to your ammonium sort of study as well. Like, who are the people that love a bit of calm and process orientated, and who are the people that want to be jacked up and anxious and stressed, and so like they want to train to the end because they're just like, fuck this, I can't. Type of madness is real in running and weightlifting, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, like part of it with that though as well is when we're looking at science, right? We have to try and control the variables. So as soon as you open things up too much, like a competition day, that type of thing, suddenly you're introducing all of these things that could also impact the result. So like if you think about it, you go to the gym and there's 10 other people watching you and yelling at you and all those sorts of things to do the lift, and that didn't happen on day one because you were just training in the gym. It's kind of like, that's not really a fair comparison of did the physiology or was there that actual change in your ability to produce force, or was it just the fact that somehow you were able to call on this bigger reserve of strength because of the fact that you had 10 guys yelling at you, throwing smelling salts at you, and the music was blasting with a bit of Marilyn Manson, beautiful people going on in the background. That's probably part of it, right? So you kind of have to have these controls. So although it might not be ecologically valid in so much as it's not a competition, it's more telling us, does this thing work? Or do we know that the effect is because of what we did rather than because of something else that happened? Because we did like an interesting study with our second years where basically they do like a research paper, and we had one where, and we only had a small sample size, so it didn't really probably wasn't super valid, the results. But basically what we did was we put on a whole bunch of different like music. So we got them to do mid-thigh pulls, and they'd have headphones on, and they'd have to listen to the music, and at a certain stage of the song, they'd have to do the effort as well. And I can't remember the exact series of songs, but we basically did like one hip hop song, one pop song, one rock song, like those sorts of things. And then they got to do a song of their own choice. And we saw like a bit of a tendency that the song of their own choice was the one they did the best in, which makes sense, right? But just so you know, Justin Bieber had a negative impact on their strength. So we might have only had a sample size of 4, but let's just call that what it is, right? But I've also known that
out there calling people soy boys rejoice.
that you can get you could actually get a positive effect out of Justin Bieber for probably a similar reason to you might from ammonia, because Jono, who I train with, I used to play him. I think he did like a bad lift one day in a comp, and I'm like, no, in the gym, and I was like, no, mate, you're coming back and you're doing that again. And we played him. I think I made him listen to Baby by Justin Bieber, and it was like
one of the greats.
He was so mad that he just lifted better. And so it's like one of those things where it's like, well, actually, context is important again, right? Like if we can make someone mad and mad helps them lift better, it doesn't matter how we get them mad. It's a slap on the back, or if it's a bit of Justin Bieber full blast in their ears. No disrespect to Justin Bieber too. I do actually not mind some of his latest stuff. So
with an 8-year-old around the place, we've got a few in the car playlist for going to school. So yeah, my Spotify played this year is going to be atrocious. Yeah. Grant Schofield put out an article last week, and I heard him talk about it in a podcast end of last year or middle of last year. And he's talking about agreeableness, and he was trying to figure out what he does when he doesn't agree with stuff. How do you find yourself on the agreeable scale? Like he's a tenured professor. You're a associate. Are you associate professor?
I'm not in the
teaching
sector anymore. That's why.
Yeah, but you're out of it now. But yeah, what did you finish up as?
I was a senior lecturer when I finished. So at UCO, I think I did 8 years there, and I finished my PhD in 2017. So we did a couple of other studies. If you want to have a look at it, you can just search my name on ResearchGate as well, and you'll be able to find those articles. And there should be full text on almost all of those. I think there's probably only about 20 articles though. So 212 makes it sounds like I've published 212, but that's just people that have cited me.
Yeah.
Which is I've never looked at that stat, to be honest. I'm that's new to me. Cracking 200, I have to take that.
Yeah,
it's not bad.
So agreeableness, where do you feel?
So what do you mean by that?
Like us going back and forth there on context of stuff. I think that's like a healthy scientific debate, and like my dad's a physics teacher and my mum's a microbiologist, both the Bachelor of Sciences at Otago. And so I've grown up with that sort of type of conversation. Well, have you considered like all that sort of stuff? And then I've been through and done a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Optometry. Again, debatable concepts all the time. Context matters.
I think it's one of those things that I was actually having this chat with a friend of mine yesterday, because I'm looking at getting back into writing a few more articles and doing a bit more coaching and those kinds of aspects, because I've realized in the last 2.5 years being out of exercise science that I think I thought I liked the data, just analyzing data. I thought I liked writing about things, but I think I've realized that I like writing about and analyzing things related to exercise and sports science and performance. So I think I've identified that about myself in the last 2.5 years. But we were talking about one of the things that I sort of think about, and probably one of the reasons I haven't posted as much as I might like, is because I have this tendency to want to be quite certain about what I'm saying. And you see a lot of people who are scientists or who have podcasts or are big on social media, and they'll sometimes say things or back things that might be supported by one study or something like that. I don't know if you listen to one of the early Huberman Lab episodes.
I can't listen to the Huberman Lab episodes.
So one of
I think what you're talking about right here is why.
One of his early ones, he talked about the effects of palm cooling, and that it did something like improve the repetitions on bench press by like 100 and something %. And
He's repeated that many times.
I'm like, what the hell? Like this it seems wrong. Like that's too big of an effect. Like I think even in the article they said something about it being greater than the effect of PEDs, and I'm like, essentially, all supplements basically, if they're legal, they probably don't work, or they don't work very well if they're, because that's kind of the nature of it, right? There's a few things that work, but they work like a little bit, they make you a little bit better, like creatine or whatever it might be. It's like those things have a small, like very small impact, but it's still an impact, right? So to see something that says that it's going to have this impact, I was like, what the heck? So I gave it a go in my garage one day just because I'm like, I have to try this. And then I was like, okay.
I think on the last time
I noticed no difference.
Talking about a product. There's a product out there for this.
Yeah, from this university that published these results.
Oh, right.
Funny, isn't it? So like, they're these special gloves that you put your hands into. And I mean, to be fair, when I tested it as well, it was a hot day. Like my garage got insulated walls, but the garage door isn't. So you can imagine when there's heat coming in there, it's hot, right?
Yeah.
So I wasn't doing it on like a non, ecologically valid, let's call it, or similar type of a scenario where it's warm. But I was like, this can't be right. And so I've looked into a bit of literature, and then it was quite funny this week. I was reading an article because as I mentioned, I'm getting back into it, so I'm trying to catch up on a bit of things. And MASS, monthly applications in, I think it's called Strength Science or something like that is the title there. But they basically do a research review each month, and they do like a review of say 6 key publications, and then talk a little bit wider about them. But I saw one of them was about this palm cooling, and I'm like, I have to read that because like I had a little bit of a look-see afterwards, and I found the study, and I found other ones that showed nothing. I'm like, it's not surprising I didn't get a benefit then if there's only one study showing a big effect. And basically their thing was there's mixed data, and if we take out the one study that had these massive effects, it's like it doesn't seem like if it does anything, it's not much. And it's not that hard to implement, so if you want to do it, hey, that's cool, but don't expect it to do 200% increase. But there was like a whole Huberman Lab episode early on that was about that. And I don't know if I should be saying names like that, but it's like one of those things where you're like, it just seems a bit strange that, sometimes these people that have the platforms probably don't do quite enough due diligence on some of the things that they talk about.
It's the same way,
and that's what frustrates me.
Being able to write a book as well is the same thing.
Yeah. So like I don't know, and that's probably one of the things
that I prefer. On a podcast as football.
I prefer to be like, I want to make sure that what I'm saying is relatively true, and there probably is that's probably a little bit of a fault as well, right? Because there is sometimes anecdote, and there are things that you just don't know, right? So sometimes your experience is the best way to figure something out. Like sometimes you'll figure something out by experimenting with it or trying it on yourself, because you're an individual, right? And things will work differently for you than they might for the average. So that's one of those other things to consider as well, is just because a training method or something works for this person doesn't mean it will work for you. So therefore, if I say this worked for me and I preach that as the gospel, and then everyone has to do, the Hayden method of, top sets with 3 back downs plus 1 AMRAP set, it's like, well, probably not. Like not everyone's going to respond great to that. But by the same token, like what's the basis for what you're saying? Is there actually something valid here, and should I trust it for a reason? So I've always been a little bit, I've found social media a little bit hard in that regard, because I don't like that people can say stuff that is just like blatantly wrong. Like Huberman Lab, at least that was a backed up claim, right? There was a study, but as you say, was it replicated? So yeah, I don't know. I'm probably going to get sued now. Huberman Lab's coming after me, mate. I'm going down. You'll never see me again.
Yeah, Stanford University's coming after you, Cole.
You might have to blank it out.
Yeah. And then there's the was it Greenfield, Adam Greenfield? No, what's his bloody name? Anyway, yeah, in the biohacking space can get some pretty good stuff.
I think one of the things with that I find a bit frustrating too, with like all this sort of stuff about optimization and making everything perfect.
It's neurotic.
Like one of the things I always think with this, right, is if you end up so worried about missing one of these little things, like the stress of you trying to get that thing in is generally probably going to be a bigger negative impact on you than doing that thing. You know, like if it's an ice bath every morning or whatever it is, and you miss your ice bath, heaven forbid, in the morning, it's like you're stressing about that all day. Actually, you probably got more of a negative effect from that than you did the positive effect yesterday from doing your ice bath, if there is a positive effect. You know, like it's one of those things where you can get so caught up on having to do every single little piece right. And in reality, each of those single little pieces probably don't have as big of an impact as you think. And so if you just chill a bit and like do the best you can, and if you miss something that, you know, like, oh, you didn't hit your calories today, you didn't hit your protein today, or you didn't get whatever it is, like, you know, whatever that thing is that makes people worried, like, oh, I missed my creatine dosage today. Like, it's probably fine, mate. You know, like, it's probably okay. And you shouldn't be stressing about all those little things, because that's probably worse for you than not doing those things in the first place anyway.
Yeah, I've definitely I think you got to go through it to have that awareness of the negative effect. But I've definitely found the things that are like healthy doses of little things, and then the going back to Tim Ferriss, the 80-20 sort of stuff. Like the one thing that I've added that I notice when the effect wears off is fish oil. When the effect wears off with that, my chemo, I get my concussion symptoms back basically, and the thing that I try to eliminate is gluten, and I know when I've had gluten, it's you know, but that's not a debilitating thing. I'm not celiac, so it's not the end of the world for me, but it's just an uncomfortable day or two, and like then it's like, what am I moving? How flexible am I? How, you know, posturally am I? How energetic am I? You know, and then it's kind of like, yeah, I have a shower. I have a shower, so I have a cold one. You know, I'd love to have a nice bath, but you know, it's like you say, it's the 0.05% benefit of the cold shower versus the 0.06% benefit of the ice bath. Like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you've got to remember that it is that tiny effect, right? Like, I mean, yes, those things can stack up, and like that's probably the part that I guess people are trying to do, right, when they're trying to optimize each of these individual little aspects, is get every last little gain that they can. I don't know, man. Once you've been a dad and you've had interrupted sleep.
Oh, mate, I listened to Matthew Walker's. No, I didn't even listen to the book. I just listened to him talk about all the concepts of the book, while Billy was 2 months old and colic and sleeping like shit. And I was having to drive from Pukekohe to Thames, and I was like, I am going to fucking die. I'm going to crash. I'm going to have a micro sleep on the road and wake up in a ditch.
That's the thing, man. Like, some of the stuff that you hear people talking about, like, you know, like it might be like the, I don't know if you've heard about the blankets or whatever that you can get.
Oh, yeah.
Cooling blankets and stuff. I'm like, man, I'll just be happy if I'm asleep for the whole night and uninterrupted. Like, your cold blanket isn't going to stop Harvey coming out of bed and coming to get me at 2 a.m. and interrupting my sleep cycle. So like, all of my benefit from your cold blanket is probably gone. Like, if there ever was one. It's so hard.
It's not for you, Hayden. It's not for you.
Nah, I know. And I think that's part of what we've got to like. Part of what I always think with this stuff as well, and even with like training principles, right? And I had Dr. Pack on my podcast a few weeks back, and he was talking about the minimum effective dose training. Yeah. And there's a sort of, you know, law of diminishing returns that you talk about, where, you know, you one set you get the most of it, the second set you get a little bit more, third set you get a little bit more, and it's like, for someone who isn't an elite level athlete, right, 2 or 3 sets, you're probably going to get the majority of the benefits, right? So you probably don't need to stress if you have to cut if you had 5 sets planned for the day and you got 3.
Yeah.
Because you ran out of time.
5 by 5, man.
All good. Like, you'll probably find you've probably got like 93% of the gains out of the possible 100. But when you're Hayden the powerlifter, like 2013, 2014, where you're actually trying to get a 1 kilo, 2 kilo PB, yes, then it is something that you want to try and optimize and you want to try and make it better. But if I'm Hayden, the 34-year-old dad who wants to get a bit stronger and enjoys his running and stuff, you know, because he finds that satisfying. Well, hey, if I have to do a 7K run today because I can't quite fit my longer 14 one in this week, okay. Like, it's one of those things where it's obviously not optimal, and it's obviously not going to be, you know, lead to the most gains for me. But by the same token, like, it's going to be okay.
That's what's been great about this Circle of Savages that we've got on Instagram. It's like our first month it was a 1K farmers carry, and it was gave a sort of a percentage ranges, and I only had 25 kg dumbbells, and so that was somewhere between 25 and 30% of my body weight, and it was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And the next month it was like run 1,000 meters, and I got sick during that, so I think there's going to be some accumulated totals as well. And I was like, well, I'll do the 1,000 meters, but I'll miss the accumulation one. And then I decided that a swimming task would be good, and I plucked out Ironman distance, and 3.8k swimming is a very long way.
That is a long way.
But thankfully for me, as a trained swimmer, it's been a while since I've swam. I was able to do that one. I went in 1 week and did 2.6k, and then came 2 weeks later and did the 3.8k, and it was like, oh, okay. But then this month we're going for a 100k total and 10, 21 or 30k run, and I'm like, oh, there's the potential for injury if you just go out and do a 30k, but you could probably do it. But it also doesn't matter, and also you don't want to get injured.
That's one of the big things as well, with these sort of like a challenge like that. It's like, well, actually, if I get hurt, I'm now off training for a long period of time. That's going to be such a more negative impact than any positive outcome that I got from that. Like, so I do need to be a little bit sensible.
Yeah, and the great thing about it is, it's like there's, I think we've all, well, maybe not all of us, a lot of us have kids of various ages. We all work. Nobody's made it and doesn't have to work. So there's that. Some are farmers, so they've got to like work ridiculous hours. One of them
your podcast isn't going to get you to make it now because of me mentioning
other
podcasts.
Yeah, I wanted to go on Huberman Lab, by the way. Didn't he is his area of research is the eyes, No, we can have a bag on Huberman because it's over. It's all over now. We've blown it. The thing I couldn't believe is I keep hearing Joe Rogan say he's got macular degeneration, and Huberman, apparently the neuro ophthalmology research or whatever it is, vision science, didn't sort of probe him and being like, oh shit, are you losing your central vision? Have you done these tests, or you need to take these supplements and stuff like that? I'm pretty sure it's just that he's 50 and he can't read anymore.
Yeah, he's getting old.
Yeah, he's just getting old, and he says it so often. That's like the moment, isn't it?
Should send him some reading glasses.
No, he has them, and he can see. But he's not alone in that misconception that you're blind because you can no longer read anymore. It's like, no, you can see. It's just out of focus. Yeah, it's like a camera. Yeah, no. That's what's been quite cool about Darren Ellis. Now he's in his 40s, and I guess he gives us a bit of a pathway of, but he's got a young child at 40, but. It does give the likes of you and I a bit of a pathway of happiness and fitness, happiness and strength, and happiness in life, post being athletic, but still being athletic.
And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I'm doing running as well, right? Is because I'm probably never going to squat 273 kilos, right? I had my chance at that and I didn't get it. And I'm not prepared to devote that many hours of training in a week anymore, and I couldn't if I wanted to, and even if I did, I don't know if I'd ever beat that, right? Like I could get everything in place, I could optimize the hell out of everything, and I might not ever get that, but just because of I already peaked potentially.
Did you listen to Aaron Smith talk to Isaac John?
Nah.
Listen to that. So Aaron Smith's talking about, like, especially when it comes to rugby, he's got 2 young boys. The phase of his life that he's in, he's getting close to the I've got to choose. Well, he has chosen. He's going to Japan if he goes to the World Cup after the World Cup, or if he doesn't go to the World Cup, he's going to Japan. And it's to basically finalize this rugby chapter of his life so he can be there for his family. Because, like he was even saying that, he's away so much that. They're in Dunedin and he's off for a coffee, and his oldest boy says to him, "Oh, you're gone now, Dad. See you later." He's like, "Oh, no, I'm back, man." But that's exactly right. Like, you could be out there trying for 273, Hayden, but I don't know how your marriage or your child would think about it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, for what? A plastic trophy, you know, like that's the thing. Like, it has to be meaningful to you in a sport like that as well. You know, like, I think that's probably the beauty of a small sport, you know, like doing something like a powerlifting, is that there isn't millions of dollars lining up for you, you know, like it's literally, you have to do it because you enjoy what you're doing. And yeah, there's a competitive aspect and you want to win or whatever it is. But if you don't enjoy the sport, it's highly unlikely you're going to spend, because, you know, we had to pay and fundraise for our own competitions to get overseas, all of that type of stuff. So it's one of those sports where if you don't actually genuinely love it, why would you bother doing it? Which is cool, because for me, like, it was one of those things that I genuinely was passionate about. I still love strength training. I still enjoy, you know, keeping up to date to an extent with the sport, because it's something that I have found great enjoyment from, and something I've had satisfaction from, and something that I've been able to help others, you know, do well and get something from as well, in terms of their own personal fulfillment, and realize that they can do things that they didn't think they could do, you know. And I guess that's part of it for me as well, as you're kind of proving to yourself, you know, that when I put in work, I can get an outcome, or that when I put in the work, I can get, you know, a result, and that hard work does pay off. Because, you know, when you go and you train hard in the gym and you put in the time and effort, and you know, get your diet right, or you do whatever it is that you need to do to be able to do that stuff, it's like, you only get the result from it if you have done that, right? You can't really cheat getting another 10 kilos on a squat. It doesn't really work like that. There's like a thing, you know, about people, you know, people may come and go, you may have this, you may have that, but 500 pounds is always 500 pounds. And I always thought that was quite a, you know, interesting one. You know, like the weight is always the same. Doesn't matter what the day's like. Doesn't matter how you feel. If you got 200 kilos on your back, you got 200 kilos on your back, and it's 200 kilos.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think, the cool thing about a sport like powerlifting is it's so measurable, right? Like there's no doubting it. If you've got calibrated plates and a calibrated bar, you're lifting what you're lifting. And, you know, if you can't hit it that day, well, that sucks, but it is the way it is. There's no like, oh, you know, it was because this happened. Although people be like, oh, I misgrooved it, or whatever it might be. It's like, yeah, you misgrooved it, which meant you missed. You know, so I think that's one of the cool things about the sport, is you can measure improvement easily, but it's also one of the curses of it, right? Because you know, if you are or aren't getting better, which can also be frustrating.
Yeah, at uni we were no powerlifters, but I remember us trying to get 5x5 over 100, and it was just like weeks and weeks and weeks, and then all of a sudden we did it, and we're like, all right, shit, that means we've got to move up again.
That's the funny thing with goals, eh? Like you can, like, you know, you set them and then you beat it, and then it's like, so what's next? You know, like what comes after I've done this? And like, it must be real, like, magnified for someone like an Olympian, right? Where they spend basically their entire life trying to get to an event to do something, and then the event finishes. And it's like, you come home.
Who's the current heavyweight,
you know,
Olympic lifting guy? Is he from like Lithuania or something? It's almost. I'd love to know what he thinks he's capable of, because it just seems like Europeans and worlds, he's just showing up and just moving it a little bit.
Oh man, how have I forgotten? Oh, Lasha Telekatsi, that's the one. Lasha Telekatsi. Yeah. I mean, he's ridiculous, man. Like, honestly, when you think, like, I don't know if you've deadlifted 500 pounds before.
I watch him do what's from the hips straight up,
clean and jerk.
Yeah, but it's not muscle.
Oh,
clean.
like a snatch.
Yeah, muscle snatch.
Yeah, so
with like ridiculous weight. I was like,
where there's he doesn't even go under, eh?
Yeah, up.
I think it was about 140 or something like that.
I'm gonna go like 70. 170 odd.
It's intense, man, because like that's what I remember when I was weightlifting, and I hadn't been doing much powerlifting at the time, and I was doing a little bit of deadlifts, you know, just to develop the pull. And I remember pulling like a deadlifting 220 at the time, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, Lasha is throwing this weight, which for most people is a weight that they will never deadlift. You know, like for a powerlifter, yeah, you'll probably get there, if you're in a certain weight class or above. But it's like for most people, even a deadlift at this weight is unthinkable. And this guy like literally throws it from the floor essentially over his head in one movement. And, like it doesn't actually make any sense. Like when you're picking, like when I picked up that weight and put it back down, I'm like, I've seen him move that, man, and it is fast. Like it's an incredible, like that's what I love about weightlifting. Like powerlifting was what I was, pretty good at comparatively. And I had a conversation last week with a guy MT who used to lift back when I lifted, and we were talking about how
I was listening to that podcast this morning. It was bloody good.
If we came back, and these days, we'd just both get absolutely blitzed, because the talent pool is so much higher. I probably wouldn't even place at nationals type thing, even at my prime. It would be, I'd be lucky to get a silver or a bronze medal, and I definitely wouldn't win. Like the talent is just extraordinary now. It's pretty cool to kind of see that. But yeah, man, like weightlifting is just a like real beautiful sport to watch. And it sounds strange saying that about people lifting weights, right? But when you see someone that does a snatch and does it really, really well, like it's a pretty graceful movement, and it's pretty just incredible. And then you think about the fact that they're able to do that with weights that for most people they can't even pick up off the floor type thing, and they just move it in a manner that actually looks very graceful and is just beautiful to watch.
That ATG page is amazing because they put the like super slow-mo of it.
Yeah,
and you just like watch the bar just like get like just past their nose and the under the bar.
Yeah,
and arms are extended, and then they'd stand up, and you're like, that's unreal.
Yeah, it's honestly, I can't comprehend it. Like we've got some pretty good lifters in New Zealand as well, and just the clean and jerks even that some of those guys do, and you're just like, what? Like, how is that a thing? Like, how can you? There's not even much you can use to describe that. Like, if you've done the Olympic lifts or you've tried to do a snatch, before, and then you watch that, you're just like, geez, I might as well give up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where do people find you, Hayden? Are you doing any coaching or consulting?
Yeah, so I've just started picking up a few clients with the online coaching at the moment. So Instagram is the best place to find me at HJP_StrongerDads. But then I've also got a website, hjpmethod.co.nz. I used to have the .com domain, but I didn't renew it 1 year. And now, last time I checked, it was some strange website selling strange things. And I think someone just sort of took it over, said I'd have to buy it off them if I want it back. And I'm like, .co.nz's there, so let's go with that.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, hjpmethod.co.nz. HJP is just my initials if you're wondering. So
nice.
Yeah.
And 10 people have left a review on your podcast.
Up to 12.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so my post today worked. I got 2 more that when I'd last checked. I'll be blocked off Instagram now, so I can't go check. So,
that's good discipline right there.
No, I bought an app. I pay for an app monthly, a subscription, because what I used to do was like I'd stay on my phone too close to bed in terms of like doing things like Instagram and stuff. I actually read on my Kindle normally before bed, which probably isn't that good, but everything else basically gets blocked. So I won't be able to access email, I won't be able to access Instagram, I won't be able to access things. And it's got this like level 2 block that you can choose to put on. And last time there was a public holiday, I think I forgot to turn it off. And so come like the Monday at 9:15 or 9:30, whenever I had it set to, it was like, well, there goes that. I guess I'll just read.
That's good.
Which is a much better use of my time.
That's right, yeah. You can, if you got an Apple phone, you can turn it to the old red screen, which doesn't stop you scrolling, but it's not so interesting anymore.
What does it do?
So I think it's like in accessories, you just turn it to red, like all the way up to red. And so everything just looks dull and crappy. And a bit like my computer right now, I've got Flux on.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how bad your lighting is actually, Hayden. But
it's not very good, mate. I need one of your special, O lights behind the...
Yeah, no, it's gold. Mate, so, weightlifting is a pretty good place to deal with these things. What keeps you in flow, man? Do you have a mantra or a way you live your life or a quote that works around when things go well?
Can I give you just a funny example from today, from my bench press set?
For sure.
It's completely out of context and not something that normally happens. But I mentioned with the powerlifting, right, that I like using music to kind of get myself into a specific state. You know, like if I was, as I said, the squat and the deadlift, it would be quite, you know, rock music that I wouldn't normally listen to day to day, but it was kind of the rhythm and the beat that gets my brain working. I actually chucked the Killers song on today before my top bench press set. Do you know the song "The Man"?
Oh, no.
by the Killers. If you can find it on your Spotify, because my Spotify might be blocked.
You'll be blocked.
Don't know if it blocks my Spotify, but if you play that tune, it's just like it was a little like amp me up type thing today, because I was like, I want to go to about halfway through. This is not normal, Hayden, and I don't like to think of myself as an arrogant person, but this is quite a...
I've never heard this song. That's the chorus.
He basically just keeps saying he's the man. and and for me with bench press today, I was on my own and I needed to get myself into the zone. I'm like, right, you know, let's have some positive reinforcement. You're the man. You can do this. Which isn't at all a normal way of thinking for me, but sometimes it helps, right? And I think I don't know, like mantras. I don't really do mantras. I actually wrote down a few things recently because, like, one of the things that I sometimes struggle with is switching off from like work thinking mode, or I'll have things come into my head. And so I was trying to like get some things that I can just repeat to myself, like, you know, like, right, you're at home now. This is your family time. Work will be there tomorrow. Like, let's focus on what we're doing right now. And that's probably one of the things I'm consistently trying to work on, is find ways to reinforce to myself that actually, like, this moment and what you're doing right now and who you're with right now, like, that should be your focus, because I'm as guilty as anyone else, right? Of, you know, chucking my screen on and scrolling Instagram or whatever it might be. And so for me, that's something I've been trying to change. And I don't think I've got to that stage I'm happy with it yet. Like, I still think there's plenty of room for improvement, but I think there's elements and there's times now where I'm getting better and being intentional in that. And that's probably the big thing for me that I would probably say to myself, is try and be intentional in what I'm doing. Like, if I'm in something, and this is one of those things that I think people that appear to be able to do a lot of things, I think that what they are is they're intentional when they're doing each of those things, right? So if I'm on the podcast with Ryan, I'm being intentional and I'm focused on you. I'm not, you know, sitting there checking my emails as I go, right? And that should probably be the same when we're around our family, around our children, around our wives, right? Is that might not need to always be like that, right? It would be a bit freaky if you're just sitting there staring at your wife or your partner the entire night wanting to have a conversation, you know? But like, making that effort that actually, hey, I need to give this full attention. Like, you know, this person in front of me right now, my full attention. I can't remember who it was. It might have been someone on one of my podcasts recently, I think, said a similar type of thing. And it has been something that's been coming back to me, as it's like, okay, you know, the moments that we have now are so important. And I think, I can't remember who it was that had that that video. Might have been a Jordan Peterson one or something that I saw
like
at some stage. But it was talking about those 4 years. And I mean, to be honest, like, it's not just those 4 years, right? Like, when you look at your kids, every stage is unique and every stage is special, and every stage you should want to absorb. But it was that type of thing where he was saying, you know, like, you need to be present now. You can't get those times back. And I think that's true for the entirety of your life, right? Is that the moments that you have now, the other things that you're going to look back on. And, you know, there's that Macklemore song about, you know, like, the good old days, like these, you know, if I knew these were the good old days sort of thing. And that's, I think, part of what we should probably all think. And even this is something I try and think about with training, right? Is I need to enjoy the fact that I can lift right now. You're like listening to a song like that from the Killers, right? You know, like, as I'm benching, I'm on my own. I'm trying to have fun. I'm trying to get myself in the zone, you know, like, to actually do what I'm trying to do. And that's part of it. Like, if you can't enjoy the process of the sport or the training or the work or whatever it is that you're doing, like, you need to find a way to make it at least a little bit better. Because, you know, it's all we've got is right now. So let's think about being intentional in how we do that.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much, Hayden. This has been a really magnificent conversation. Like I said at the start, you threw me with your turbos jumper on. And it's always fun when you do something unexpected and exactly that, stay in the moment. So thank you
I
so
also
much.
like that we've just gone, like real left field from place to place today. Like there's not like you've got enough elements that people know about some of the stuff I've done or who I am. But I love that we've just gone like from here to here to here. Like it's been cool because we've got to cover so many different things.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's good about these organic conversations, right? Is that you just kind of end up where you end up, just like it's a yarn. So it's been good.
Yeah, and it's been great to talk some shop in the strength and conditioning world. I was thinking as we're going back and forth, it's nothing like sitting in a room with 4 strength and conditioning coaches and just having them like pan it out. Or I'd do this, or maybe have you thought about this? Yeah, it used to be great. Yeah.
Mate. Well, I mean, if we do a future episode and you want to get another strength and conditioning coach on and just let us go at it and talk about training methods, I always love a yarn like that. I used to work for Reactive Training Systems last year, or start of last year, end of the year before. I worked for them for about a year, but that was one of the coolest things was when you just had like we'd have our I can't remember what we called them, but basically our coaches catch ups, like where we'd all get together. Strategy. I think we called them strategy sessions. And we'd literally just get together and yarn about different ways of coaching, what we'd be doing with athletes, what had worked, what hadn't, different things we've been trying that might not have been conventional. And it's like, man, that's what's cool about having a team of people that you're working with in something like that. Because you go on some mean tangents, man, about different philosophies. It's interesting.
Yeah, I was told to watch the space from Industrial Athletic when I tagged them about Summer Strong. I said we need this in New Zealand, and so I am watching this space, Industrial Athletic. I want New Zealand to have a Summer Strong version. It'd be good.